Week 14, Thinking Out Loudest, Lecture 4.2, Variations on a Theme Park, Imagineering, and the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. As a child, I was fascinated by the imaginative, storied, and futuristic architecture and spaces and technologies on display at the theme parks we visited in the 1960s and 70s. They were new, and to me they suggested a greater creativity than anything I had seen in what I considered the rather dystopian landscapes I lived in and had visited in the real world. Well, except for Tomorrowland, which, despite a few cosmetic improvements, is as ugly and uninspiring in that drab, monolithic, Le Corbusian concrete way today as it was when it opened in the 1950s. It should be renamed Yesterland, as far as I'm concerned, and not in any quaint, nostalgic way. The fact that until this day it still has the Autopia with gas-guzzling, internal combustion-driven go-karts noisily belching carbon fumes into the LA smog says it all. There was only one brief period when I was in graduate school in urban planning at UCLA in the early 2000s when some dedicated and visionary Imagineers decided that all the plantings in Tomorrowland should be edible landscaping, grown without pesticides, to reflect a future where we tackle hunger and ensure food security in an overpopulated world with rapidly degrading soils by making our cities produce the food stuff we need to live in them. I learned from Disney staff that despite the best intentions, they quickly had to remove all the signage expressing this vision of sustainability because they were afraid the public would eat the vegetation and maybe get sick and sue, or simply pick it to death. Each weekend when I would go to the park to study, which I did because I was a season pass holder working as a horticulture intern at the LA Zoo and fascinated with co-evolutionary relationships in theme park environments, I would wink and nod at a few Hispanic and Asian families who would also surreptitiously graze on the edible flowers and foliage and pick the occasional fruit when the park staff weren't watching. But while the Magic Kingdom's Tomorrowland never quite got it right in terms of envisioning sustainability, the Imagineers in LA told me that they had even proposed electric cars long ago for Autopia, but Esso, the oil company, is the ride sponsor and wouldn't let them. Disney's Epcot had tried to demonstrate certain aspects of sustainability to the public, and to its credit, the Disney parks in Florida use a substantial amount of solar electricity these days, have always used the monorail and natural gas vehicles to get from park to park, and have $1 million plus harvest-powered biodigester to turn much of the food waste from the park into biomethane to generate electricity and hot water and fertilizer. Sadly, however, Epcot itself never became the true World's Fair for sustainable living that Disney intended. My father did a lot of work for Disney. He was a friend of Disney's daughter Diane and actually spent time with Walt at his house and studio when he was a high school student, and ended up doing articles and books and television specials and scripts for Disney as an adult. And so we spent a lot of our childhood vacations at Disney World. When I was 14, Dad took me to the top of the RCA Tower in New York City to see the corporate showcase models and artist renderings depicting Walt's original vision for Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. It was nothing like what the park turned into, as Walt Disney himself explained before he died in 1966, which we can watch a little piece of.
Now our plans include an airport of the future down here in Osceola County, an entrance complex where all visitors will enter Disney World, an industrial park area covering about 1,000 acres, and of course the theme park area way up here. And all these varied activities around the Disney World will be tied together by a high-speed, rapid transit system running almost the full length of the property.
Here are some quotes from Disney regarding the experiment he wanted to conduct. "It's like the city of tomorrow ought to be, a city that caters to the people as a service function. It will be a planned, controlled community, a showcase for American industry and research, schools, cultural and educational opportunities," he said. He said, "We have done a lot of thinking on a model community, and I would like to be a part of building one. A city of tomorrow, as you might say. I don't believe in going out to this extreme blue sky stuff that some of the architects do. I believe people still want to live like human beings, but there are a lot of things that could be done. I'm not against the automobile. I just feel that you can design so that the automobile is there, but still put people back as pedestrians again. I'd love to work on a project like that. He said, but if we can bring together the technical know-how of American industry and the creative imagination of the Disney organization, I am confident we can create right here in Disney World a showcase to the world of the American free enterprise system. And he said, the one thing I learned from Disneyland was to control the environment. Without that, we get blamed for the things that someone else does. When they come here, they're coming because of an integrity that we've established over the years. And they drive for hundreds of miles, and the little hotels on the fringe would jump their rates 3 times. I've seen it happen, and I just can't take it because, I mean, it reflects on us. I just feel a responsibility to the public when I go into this thing that we must control that. And when they come into this so-called world, that we will take the blame for what goes on. How's that for responsibility with great power?
Here in Florida, we have something special we never enjoyed at Disneyland, the blessing of science. There's enough land here to hold all the ideas and plans we could possibly imagine.
He also said, I can never stand still. I must explore and experiment. I'm never satisfied with my work. I resent the limitations of my own imagination. Disney said, to the youngsters of today, I say, believe in the future. The world is getting better. There's still plenty of opportunity. Why would you believe it? When I was a kid, I thought it was already too late for me to make good at anything. He said, the only problem with anything of tomorrow is that the pace we're going right now, tomorrow would catch up with us before we got it built. And he said, people sort of live in the dark about things. A lot of young people think the future is closed to them, that everything has been done. This is not so. There are still plenty of avenues to be explored. Disney told us, the whole thing here is the organization. Whatever we accomplish belongs to our entire group, a tribute to our combined effort. Look at Disneyland. That was started because we had the talents to start it, the talents of the organization. And our World's Fair shows what we did was possible only because we already had the staff that had worked together for years, blending creative ideas with technical know-how. Blending creative ideas with technical know-how. That's what E.O. Wilson talks about, blending art and science. Disney said, our heritage and ideals, our code and standards, the things we live by and teach our children, are preserved or diminished by how freely we exchange ideas and feelings. He was an open source kind of guy. He said, believe me, it's the most exciting and challenging assignment we've ever tackled at Walt Disney Productions.
But the most exciting, the most important part of our Florida project, in fact, the heart of everything we'll be doing in Disney World, will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow. We call it epcot, spelled E-P-C-O-T, Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. Here it is in larger scale. Epcot will take its cue from the new ideas and new technologies that are now emerging from the creative centers of American industry. It will be a community of tomorrow that will never be completed, but will always be introducing and testing and demonstrating new materials and new systems. And Epcot will always be a showcase to the world for the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise. I don't believe there's a challenge anywhere in the world that's more important to people everywhere than finding solutions to the problems of our cities. But where do we begin? How do we start answering this great challenge? Well, we're convinced we must start with the public need. And the need is not just for curing the old ills of old cities. We think the need is for starting from scratch on virgin land and building a special kind of new community. So that's what Epcot is, an experimental prototype community that will always be in a state of becoming. It will never cease to be a living blueprint of the future, where people actually live a life they can't find anywhere else in the world. Everything in Epcot will be dedicated to the happiness of the people who will live, work, and play here, and those who come here from all around the world to visit our living showcase. We don't presume to know all the answers. In fact, we're counting on the cooperation of American industry to provide their very best thinking during the planning and the creation of our experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And most important of all, when Epcot has become a reality and we find the need for technologies that don't even exist today, it's our hope that Epcot will stimulate American industry to develop new solutions that will meet the needs of people expressed right here in this experimental community.
Now at 14, I declared to my father and the Disney people showing me Walt's original visions, that's what I want to do with my career. I want to be an Imagineer helping to evolve Epcot and spread it everywhere. But as it turned out, corporate interests reduced Disney's majestic and inspiring vision to just another theme park. And while I ended up getting my master's and PhD degrees from UCLA in urban planning, and got to know and admire and love quite a few Imagineers who worked tirelessly on Epcot and the Disney parks, I had to rededicate myself toward the vision of participating in and replicating and teaching in and about real experimental prototype communities through the eco-village movement around the world, and through work in urban slums and rural and rainforest villages. Nonetheless, as I have visited theme parks, zoos, aquaria, natural history and science museums, and botanical gardens around the world for the past half-century, from Boston to Brunei, especially when working for the Los Angeles Zoo Horticulture Department, I've noticed that they are indeed experimenting with the latest technologies and everything from acceleration and transportation and fuels and waterworks, plumbing, planting, recycling, waste management, crowd management, architecture and sculpture, heating and cooling, resource recovery, animal welfare, and even food production. The public may see them all as primarily entertainment experiences, but they, of all locations in the built environment, use a substantial portion of their revenue experimenting with the borderlands between fact and fiction, between science and fantasy, pushing the envelope for how we see ourselves in relation to the world, and how we might transcend our fears and overcome our limitations. Theme parks actually challenge us with immersive narratives that excite the imagination, and they do have real impact on the real world outside their walls. How many of you have wished that the complex, lushly vegetated, shape-crete, sculpted fantasy and adventure landscapes and water features of theme parks would spill out into the real world, and then delighted when you visited a new shopping mall or city center or airport and seen the techniques and technologies suddenly become part of the ordinary built environment? Airports were the first to use the Disney monorail for transportation, but when I visited Chicago's O'Hare Airport in the early 2000s, I was delighted to visit an entire floor devoted to the Tower Garden vertical aeroponic food production technology that I had seen first at Epcot's Land Pavilion back in 1982. And was further enthralled that frosty winter that I could order fresh greens from that indoor urban farming demonstration in many of the airport restaurants. Looking out the window of the restaurant, I also saw they had vegetated the roof spaces and learned that Chicago had become a leader in the green roof movement. Things we had only seen in theme parks when I was a kid were suddenly becoming part of la vie quotidienne, daily life, moving out of the scarcity side of the diffusion of innovation model graph to the social proof side. In his 1992 book, Variations on a Theme Park, The New American City and the End of Public Space, urban planner Michael Sorkin makes the case that the invention of the Disney theme park genre in the 1950s and its derivatives fundamentally changed society with imagineered public-private spaces that were at the same time fanciful as well as practical, but basically had to conform to market demands.